It was supposed to be a weekend of luxury and decadence, an escape from the mundane grind. My friend Jack had invited a group of us to his boss's yacht, an absurdly extravagant vessel docked at a private marina. Jack was vague about how he'd convinced his boss to lend it to him, but none of us cared. We were too dazzled by the promise of endless champagne and ocean air. I was the last to board that Friday night, my phone buzzing with texts about the killer view and next-level bar setup. The yacht was enormous, a gleaming leviathan named the Seraphim, its deck festooned with string lights that shimmered in the night. But as I stepped on, a peculiar unease gnawed at the edges of my excitement. The crew was conspicuously absent, and the air carried an odd metallic tang, like rusting iron. Still, the party was in full swing. Jack, tipsy and laughing, met me with a martini in hand. "Isn't this insane?" he said, gesturing wildly at the boat's opulent interior. Gilded railings, polished wood floors, and plush furniture screamed wealth. Yet the spaces felt off. Too clean, too perfect. It wasn't until later, as the clock crept past midnight, that things began to unravel. The first hint was the music. We'd been blasting a playlist from someone's phone, but suddenly it cut out, replaced by a low, raspy static. The sound wove through the room, rising and falling in waves. No one could shut it off. "Maybe it's interference?" Jack offered weakly, fiddling with the speaker. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought it was just drunk chatter. But as I moved through the yacht, I noticed something chilling. The whispers weren't coming from the party. They seemed to drift from below deck, faint and guttural. Curiosity and liquid courage pushed me to investigate. I descended the spiral staircase into the lower cabins. The air grew colder with each step, and the metallic tang intensified. The whispers turned into soft moans, punctuated by what sounded like claws raking against metal. I reached a door at the end of the hall. Its surface was marred with deep scratches, the wood splintered in places. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. Inside, the room was dark except for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through a porthole. The air felt thick, oppressive. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the shadows, motionless. Its outline was human, but something was horribly wrong. Its limbs were too long, its posture unnatural. When it turned to face me, I froze. Its face was featureless, just smooth, pale flesh stretched over a skull. It cocked its head, as if curious, and then its chest began to heave, emitting a wet, rattling sound that might have been laughter. I stumbled backward, slamming the door shut and bolting upstairs. The party had descended into chaos. The lights flickered violently, casting the guests in fractured flashes of brightness and shadow. The whispers from below deck were louder now, joined by an eerie chorus of laughter. People began to scream. One girl pointed at the water beyond the deck, her face pale. I followed her gaze and saw the ocean boiling. Shapes writhed beneath the surface. Long, serpentine figures that shouldn't exist outside nightmares. Someone shouted, "We need to get off this boat!" But the gangplank we'd used to board was gone, and the dock seemed impossibly far, shrouded in an unnatural fog. And then the Seraphim started moving. No one had touched the controls, but the yacht surged forward, cutting through the dark water like it had a mind of its own. The fog thickened, swallowing the marina and the city lights. All that remained was the sea and the sinister pull of something far off in the distance. One by one, the others began to vanish. First, it was Jack, there one moment, gone the next, leaving only his martini glass spinning on the floor. Then it was Rachel, whose terrified screams echoed from below deck before abruptly cutting off. I clung to the rail, my knuckles white, as the whispers transformed into a deafening roar. In the end, it was just me, standing alone on the deck. The fog parted briefly, revealing a massive structure ahead, a derelict lighthouse perched on jagged rocks. Its beam was dim, casting an unnatural, sickly green light that made my stomach churn. The yacht stopped. The whispers fell silent. I don't know what compelled me to step off the boat, but my feet moved of their own accord, carrying me toward the lighthouse. As I crossed the deck, I caught a final glimpse of the water. The shapes beneath the surface were watching, their glowing eyes unblinking. I can't explain what happened inside the lighthouse. The things I saw, they don't belong to this world. But I know this, I wasn't supposed to leave. Whatever haunts the Seraphim demands something, a soul, a life, a sacrifice. And now that I've escaped, I can feel it hunting me, the whispers following me even on dry land. So if you ever find yourself invited to a party on a yacht named the Seraphim, don't go. No matter how tempting, no matter how glamorous, stay far, far away. Don't know how I made it back to shore. The memory is fragmented, like a dream slipping through my fingers. I remember collapsing on the rocky coastline as the lighthouse's sickly green light flickered out. I remember the yacht, the Seraphim, vanishing into the fog, its horn blaring one final, mournful note. And then, nothing. When I came to, I was in a hospital. A nurse hovered over me, her face drawn with concern. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, her voice muffled as though I were underwater. "A fisherman found you on the rocks." I wanted to tell her about the yacht, about the things in the water and the whispers that wouldn't stop. But as I opened my mouth, the words dried up. How could I explain what happened without sounding insane? "You've been through an ordeal," she added, placing a reassuring hand on my arm. "Rest." I nodded weakly, but there was no rest. Not really. The first night in the hospital was when I realized it hadn't let me go. At first, it was subtle, shadows that didn't belong, the faint scent of salt water despite being miles inland. Then the whispers began. They were faint at first, just a murmur in the background, like a distant conversation I couldn't quite make out. But as the night wore on, they grew louder, more insistent. "Come back," they hissed. I pressed the call button, desperate for the nurse to come and interrupt the oppressive silence. When she entered, the whispers stopped. But her face twisted in confusion as she neared me. "You're soaking wet," she said, lifting the sheets to reveal that my hospital gown and the bed beneath me were drenched. She didn't believe me when I told her I hadn't spilled anything. And how could I tell her the truth? That the water smelled of brine and decay, just like the yacht? Over the next few days, the whispers followed me everywhere. The hospital discharged me quickly, perhaps too quickly. They said I needed rest, that my symptoms were psychological, a response to trauma. But they couldn't explain why I woke up every morning with my hair damp and the faint imprint of ropes around my wrists and ankles. I went back to my apartment, thinking that being home might help. It didn't. The first night back, I heard footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door. I lived on the 3rd floor. When I worked up the courage to look through the peephole, the hallway was empty. But a puddle of water stretched across the carpet, leading to my door. The dreams started soon after. In them, I was back on the Seraphim. The deck was slick with blood, the air alive with screams and whispers. The faceless figure from below deck would be there, its 2 long limbs twitching as it pointed toward the lighthouse. "Come back," it would say, its voice a wet, guttural rasp. "You owe us." I'd wake up gasping for air, my chest heaving as if I'd been drowning. My bed was always soaked, the smell of salt and decay clinging to the sheets. Last night was the worst. I woke up to find myself standing at the edge of my bathtub, the faucet running full blast. The water overflowed, cascading onto the floor, soaking the entire bathroom. My hands were pruned, as though I'd been submerged for hours. And then I saw it, in the mirror above the sink. The reflection wasn't mine. It was the faceless figure, its featureless head tilting as it watched me. Its 2 long arms stretched out, pressing against the glass from the inside. "Come back," it whispered, its voice reverberating through the room. I stumbled backward, my foot slipping on the wet tile. As I fell, the mirror cracked, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. When I came to, the bathroom was dry. The mirror was intact. But I wasn't alone. Carved into the condensation on the mirror's surface were the words, "Time's up." I'm writing this now because I don't think I have much time left. The whispers are louder than ever. They're coming from the walls, the vents, the drains. I hear the soft lapping of waves no matter where I go, and my clothes are always damp. And last night, as I stared out of my apartment window, I saw it. Docked in the parking lot, Where no boat should ever be, was the Seraphim. Its string lights glowed faintly, casting eerie patterns on the asphalt. The fog had followed it here, swallowing the edges of the lot, making the yacht appear as if it floated on an endless sea. I don't know what's waiting for me on that cursed vessel, but I know it won't stop until I return. If you find this message, please remember, some invitations are never meant to be accepted. And some debts can never be repaid. I hear them now, the whispers, right outside my door. I think I'm ready to face whatever's waiting for me. But if you ever see the Seraphim, if it ever beckons to you, run. And don't look back. I thought I had escaped. For weeks after that night, I clung to the thin threads of normalcy, desperate to convince myself it had all been a stress-induced hallucination. My friends' disappearances became a series of cold case headlines. Yacht party guests vanish in freak maritime incident. No bodies, no survivors, no trace. I was the only one who knew what really happened, or thought I did. But the Seraphim wasn't finished with me. The first sign came late one night, while I was trying to sleep. I live in a small apartment overlooking the harbor. Ironic, I know. My window offers a view of the city's marina, a familiar comfort after the horrors I'd faced. But that night, as I lay in bed, I noticed an unusual light shining through the blinds. At first I assumed it was a fishing boat or maybe one of the party yachts docked nearby. But the light was too steady, too cold, a piercing green glow that set my nerves on edge. I pulled back the blinds and there it was. The Seraphim, sitting in the harbor as if it had never left. The string lights on the deck were dark, its gleaming surface now dulled and rusted. The Cursed Yacht bobbed in the water, impossibly close to my apartment, its silhouette framed by the sickly green glow emanating from somewhere deep inside. My stomach dropped. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe it was a replica, a trick of the mind, a ghost ship conjured by lingering trauma. I closed the blinds, locked every door and window, and crawled into bed with a bottle of whiskey for comfort. The knock on the door came around 3 a.m. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and slow. I froze, my heart hammering. No one should have been able to get into the building after hours. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. No answer. I crept to the peephole, every nerve in my body screaming at me to ignore it. Through the fisheye lens, I saw nothing but the dim hallway. Yet the knocking came again, louder this time. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice trembling with fear. The knocking stopped. I backed away from the door, adrenaline coursing through me. But as I turned, I saw it, a wet footprint on the floor, right by the entrance. Then another. And another, leading deeper into my apartment. I wasn't alone. Gripping a kitchen knife, I followed the trail into my living room. The footprints stopped at the center of the room, pooling into a dark, brackish stain on the carpet. And then I heard it, the whispers. They were soft at first, like a faint breeze, but they grew louder, coiling around me. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, mocking, taunting. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into bursts of shadow and green-tinted brightness. That's when I saw her. Rachel. She stood in the corner, dripping seawater onto the floor. Her eyes were blank, her mouth slightly open, as if gasping for breath. She took a halting step forward, her movements unnatural, like a puppet on tangled strings. "You left us," she rasped, her voice layered with something else, something ancient and wrong. "I tried," I stammered, backing away. Her lips twisted into a grotesque smile. "It's not done with you." The lights went out completely, plunging the apartment into suffocating darkness. I fumbled for my phone, its dim flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. But Rachel was gone. The only sound was the faint creak of something heavy shifting outside. I hesitated, then made the mistake of looking out the window. The Seraphim was closer now, impossibly close, its hull looming just beyond the harbor wall. The green light pulsed from its windows, brighter and more menacing than before. And then the whispers changed. They were no longer disembodied. They were inside my apartment, rising into a deafening chorus. I ran. The streets were eerily empty as I bolted from my building, the green glow from the yacht casting long, warped shadows on the walls. The whispers followed, always just behind me, a suffocating presence I couldn't outrun. I don't remember how far I ran or where I ended up, but eventually, I found myself at a public park near the water. The whispers had faded, replaced by the rhythmic lapping of waves against the shore. For a moment, I thought I was safe. That's when I saw the reflection in the water. The Seraphim wasn't in the harbor anymore. It was here, just offshore, its grotesque silhouette framed by the full moon. Figures moved on deck, shapeless, faceless things that stared back at me with hollow, glowing eyes. One of them raised a hand and pointed directly at me. I don't remember much after that. Just the feeling of cold water swallowing me whole, and the sound of my own screams blending with the laughter of the damned. I woke up in my apartment the next morning, drenched and shivering, my windows wide open. On the floor, written in black, brackish streaks, was a single word. Soon. I haven't slept since. The Seraphim is always there, lurking at the edges of my vision, waiting. I've tried to leave town, but every road leads me back to the marina. It wants me back on board. I don't know how much longer I can resist. If you're reading this, please stay away from the water. Don't let it find you. Don't let it pull you in. And if you ever see the Seraphim, run. Because once it claims you, it never lets go. It's been a week since my last post, and I feel like I'm unraveling. The Seraphim won't let me go. It's everywhere, in my dreams, in the corner of my eye, and sometimes even in my reflection. I've started to feel the whispers crawling into my thoughts, little suggestions that don't feel like my own. I thought I could ignore it. I thought I could keep moving, outrun whatever tether it has on me. But there's no escape. Not really. Last night, it escalated. It started with a dream, or at least, I thought it was a dream. I was back on the yacht, the deck slick with water that stank of brine and decay. The green glow pulsed from below, seeping through the planks like the yacht itself was alive. The others were there, Jack, Rachel, even people I hadn't seen that night. They were standing perfectly still, their faces slack, their eyes glossy and unseeing. They moved in unison, turning toward me like marionettes on strings. Their mouths opened, and the whispers poured out, not in words, but in an overwhelming torrent of sound that burned in my head. You need to come back. I woke up gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat. But as I sat up, I realized the whispers hadn't stopped. They were louder now, filling the room like a physical presence. And the window was open again. This time, there were footprints, wet, brackish imprints that led from the window to the edge of my bed. They stopped there, as if someone, or something, had been watching me while I slept. The whispers grew louder, morphing into a low, guttural chant. I could feel it pulling at me, urging me to move. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound out of my apartment and down to the marina. The air was cold, the kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones. The streets were empty, as if the entire city had been swallowed by the night. When I reached the water, I saw it. The Seraphim was waiting. It wasn't moored to the dock, it hovered just beyond reach, its green glow casting eerie ripples on the black water. The deck was empty, but I could feel something watching me from the shadows. I don't know what compelled me to step closer, but as I did, a small skiff appeared at the edge of the dock. It hadn't been there a moment ago. It bobbed gently, its surface slick with seawater and something darker. The whispers surged, filling my head with static. Come back! My feet moved before my brain could process what was happening. I stepped into the skiff, my hands gripping the slimy oars. The world blurred around me as I rowed toward the yacht, the green light growing brighter with every stroke. When I reached the Seraphim, the ladder appeared, unfurling itself from the side like an invitation, or a trap. I climbed. The deck was slick and cold under my hands, the air heavy with that metallic tang I'd come to associate with the yacht. The lights flickered erratically, casting warped shadows that danced across the surface. And then I saw them. The figures from my dream. They stood in a perfect circle in the center of the deck, their heads bowed. Jack was among them, his face pale and sunken, his mouth moving silently. The others were the same, their bodies swaying as if caught in a phantom breeze. As I stepped closer, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to come from the yacht itself. You should not have left. The figures turned to face me, their eyes glowing with the same sickly green light that pulsed from the ship. Jack stepped forward, his movements stiff and unnatural. You belong here, he said, his voice layered with something ancient and malevolent. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. I don't belong anywhere near this place. Jack tilted his head, his lips curling into a grotesque smile. But you do. You brought us here. You opened the door. What door? I demanded, my voice cracking. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the center of the circle, where a trapdoor now gaped open, its edges glowing faintly. The voice came again, louder this time. Come! See! Against every instinct, I stepped forward and peered into the opening. The green glow was blinding, pulsating like a heartbeat. And at the bottom of the pit, something moved, something massive and coiled, its surface glistening like wet stone. It saw me. The whispers exploded into a cacophony, and the figures on deck began to move, their hands outstretched as they advanced on me. I ran. I don't remember how I got off the yacht, but I woke up hours later on the dock, my clothes soaked and my hands trembling. The Seraphim was gone, the marina eerily quiet. But I can still feel it. The whispers haven't stopped, and I know the yacht isn't far. It's waiting, watching, pulling me closer with every passing day. I don't know how much longer I can fight it. If you're reading this, please don't come looking for me. Don't try to help. Just stay away from the water. Because once the Seraphim chooses you, there's no escape.